St. John of the Cross, 1542 to 1591. St. John of the Cross is one of the most inspiring of the 36 doctors of the Church. He is known as a doctor of mystic theology and is also known for his writings and collaborations with St. Teresa of Avila to form the Carmelite order. St. John of the Cross began his prayer life as a young child suffering poverty and persecution, and he dedicated his life to sharing his experiences of receiving God's love. John's spirituality was characterized by his devotion to reading the Bible, his works of charity, and his transforming unity with God. St. John of the Cross led a dedicated prayer life and had a strong devotion to reading the Bible. St. John of the Cross was born Juan de Yepes y Alvarez in Fonteveros, Spain, on June 24, 1542. John learned the importance of family through his parents, especially his father, who gave up his family's wealth to be with John's mother, who was a pauper. After his father passed away, John was called to serve God in an order. His family ran out of money, and they wandered around aimlessly looking for shelter and work. When John turned 14, he found work helping to care for incurable hospital patients. It was in this occupation that John started to appreciate the goodness and love in both the world and in God. John of the Cross learned at an early age that love requires sacrifice, both for his family and for God. It was through St. John of the Cross's devotion to prayer and reading the Bible from an early age that he grew to be one of the world's most renowned saints. Later in life, John was ordained as a priest and joined the Carmelite order. When St. Teresa of Avila asked him to help reform the Carmelite order, he eagerly accepted because he believed in returning the order to its prayer life. John of the Cross became one of the first masters of novices of the discalced Carmelite friars. Many Carmelites felt threatened by St. John of the Cross's reform, and some members of his own reform even kidnapped him, locking him in a cell and beating him 3 times a week. Yet in that unbearable dark, cold, and desolation, his love and faith were like fire and light. He had nothing left but God, and God brought John his greatest joys in that tiny cell. John escaped from his jail cell by unscrewing the lock on the door and sneaking past the guard. He hid in a convent full of nuns, and would often read them the poems that he wrote while being imprisoned. When he finally broke free of the shackles of captivity, he then devoted his life to sharing and explaining the experiences that he faced of God's love. The goal of St. John of the Cross's writing was divine union. John's religious literature focuses on 3 developmental stages of meditation, contemplation, and union. John's objective of the meditation and mortification stages is to make Christ more attractive and desirable than other desires. The images thus increase the love, and it is love that fashions the likeness to Christ in the soul. The second stage, contemplation, reveals Christ in pure faith beyond the normal processes of thought. The goal of John's 3 stages of divine union makes the soul the perfect reflection of Christ, the mirror of the new divine beauty, and Christ born anew. St. John of the Cross related psychology to religion in some of his prayerful writings. St. John of the Cross obtained most of his knowledge of Catholicism through meditation rather than through religious lectures. The system of his writing was nicknamed empirical mysticism. St. John of the Cross explicitly talked about the powers of God's work in his writings, and these writings helped to bring him closer to God. John is commonly known for his writings about the soul. He wrote that the soul was sacred, and that we must try to keep our souls pure and love our neighbors with all of our soul, because that is all that will be left of us when we die. He said, "In the twilight of life, God will not judge us on our earthly possessions and human successes, but on how well we have loved." The most prominent theme in all of St. John of the Cross's writings is love. In his many books, he emphasized that love is all we need to enjoy the journey of life. In his writing, he tells Christians all over the world to rely on love to get them through anything. He connected love to charity because he was also a big supporter of helping the poor. He says that showing love towards others, even strangers, will help bring love and joy into their own hearts. He wrote, "Where there is no love, put love, and you will find love." He commonly wrote about his own experiences with God's love and how God's love got him through the hardships of life. St. John of the Cross emphasized the axiom that the soul must completely empty itself of sin and selfishness before it can completely unify with God in heaven. St. John of the Cross refers to purgatory as the dark night, and he says that this is where God perfects and completes the task of making the soul pure. He then says that, after the soul is completely pure and sinless, it exits the dark night and goes on to heaven to be with God forever. His two most famous poems related to this topic are Noche Oscura del Alma, The Dark Night of the Soul, and Llama de Amor Viva, The Living Flame of Love. His writing was centered upon the need to love God above all things, and to not let anything hold you back from loving, trusting, and believing in Him. In 1578, John moved to southern Spain to join Southern Carmelites. It was there that he wrote reflections on his experiences with prayer and the deepening of his spirit. St. John of the Cross died on December 14, 1591, while repeating the psalm, "Into your hands, O Lord, I commend my spirit." He was buried in a vault underneath the floor of the church of Ubeda. The relics of his body were found intact when his tomb was opened 2 years after his death. In May of 1593, St. John of the Cross's remains were moved to Segovia. St. John of the Cross got his name of the Cross through his loving devotion to Christianity. John is called of the Cross because the cross symbolizes the place where all wounds of suffering and sin are healed. St. John of the Cross went through an extreme amount of suffering throughout his life, facing poverty, death of family members, imprisonment, and abandonment. John looked to the cross, more specifically Christ's death on the cross, as a way to escape his sufferings and put his efforts of love and charity towards God. St. John of the Cross was one of the most spiritual and influential saints of all time. His devotion to the Church, reading the Bible, and explaining his experiences of prayer are what categorize him as a doctor of the Church. He was canonized as saint by Pope Benedict XII in 1726 for his tremendous works of God, prayer, and the Church. He was named as a doctor of the Church in the 20th century by Pope Pius XI. St. John of the Cross was one of the most loving and genuine people of his time. He constantly reminded others that God will get them through anything as long as they put their belief and trust in Him and His plan. St. John of the Cross suffered through a life of many hardships, but he never let any of it get in the way of his loving relationship with God. He once said, "If you purify your soul of attachment to and desire for things, you will understand them spiritually. If you deny your appetite for them, you will enjoy their truth, understanding what is certain in them." He constantly emphasized that God is almighty, and that God must always come before any material or unspiritual things in our lives. St. John of the Cross was devoted to coming closer to God and sharing his experiences of God's love with others. The following is a prayer from St. John of the Cross's Sayings of Light and Love. Mine are the heavens, and mine is the earth. Mine are the nations, the just are mine, and mine the sinners. The angels are mine, and the Mother of God, and all things are mine. And God himself is mine, and for me, because Christ is mine, and all for me. What do you ask then, and seek, my soul? Yours is all of this, and all is for you. Do not engage yourself in anything less, or pay heed to the crumbs that fall from your Father's table. Go forth and exult in your glory. Hide yourself in it and rejoice, and you will obtain the supplications of your heart.